ATW Live special vice presidential cage fight edition. I'm Matt Taibbi.
I'm Walter Kern.
Walter, you were awesome at the Rescue the Republic event. That was if I had a hammer speech was fantastic. If everybody hasn't read it yet, they should definitely check it out or watched it.
Well,
Uh,
your speech was magisterial, and I mean that from my heart. And it must seem strange to walk in on a mutual admiration society if you're at the live stream, but I was moved by it, proud of it. I laughed. The audience loved it. It went trending on Twitter. Everything a man could dream of.
That's really funny. Yeah, no, I was very worried about following up Russell, but got into it in the middle of it, so I think it went all right.
Well,
But
Russell and Jordan Peterson moved to a level of abstraction and Pentecostal inspiration that is hard to follow. But I think after that, lightning strike from God that they've conducted into the audience, you're much more witty and composed and
I don't know.
paragraph based speech. I don't think there were many paragraphs in the previous production.
Maybe not. I would trade it all for Russell's hair, though. So that there's that too. So what do you? Okay, this is Tim Waltz and JD Vance. What are you expecting? Everything I read is complete just gibberish and unreadable. The only detail I saw today that was interesting at all is that the Washington Post is going to have 29 people watching.
That's all 29 who work there, I think, now after the layoffs.
They listed all of them. Our live coverage contributors. There's just this long list that's really funny.
Are they going to fight for a scoop among the 29, or because that's a lot of people to be competing for the limelight?
Well, they're saying a group of Washington Post reporters will share insights, analysis, and fact-check the only scheduled debate between former President Donald Trump's running mate. And,
I'm done with the fact-checking bullshit.
Yeah,
no, nothing has been more abused. My fact check on fact checks is that it isn't worthwhile because they get it wrong too, and nobody's fact checking. Who will fact check the fact checkers?
Right. Yeah. I rate it mostly false and needs context.
10 Pinocchios.
That's right. 10 Pinocchios.
But Matt, okay, so whatever the rest of the world is expecting, here's what I expect. And first of all, I'm wearing a checked red lumberjack shirt because this is a battle of the Midwesterners.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's going to be the thing tonight. Yeah.
Right. The Midwest, thought to be an emulsified and homogeneous region, is actually broken up into many microclimates culturally. And Ohio, which Vance represents, Middle Ohio, and Nebraska, where Waltz is from, and Minnesota, where he pretends to be from, are quite different. So there's also the fact that J.D. Vance is Yale educated, as Tim Waltz won't ever let us forget. And even though they are both Midwesterners, I expect a more polished performance from Vance and a more folksy put on from Waltz.
What's the word we're looking for there? There's a word there. Affected, maybe?
Well, I haven't seen the drinking game rules, but
Oh, okay. Yeah.
One of them has to do with Waltz's phony Midwesternisms that he's going to launch, like rockets at Israel.
Yeah. So, yeah. Once again, folks, look, I'm getting old. I just can't do the hard liquor thing anymore. So, it's beer for me tonight, and just quickly going through the rules. Project 2025, coming from Waltz. Mention of Waltz's military record. Anybody saying proud of my service? That's a drink. Vance accusing Waltz of socialism, ties to China, to the CCP, anti-Haitian bigotry, Vance mentioning a colorful family member. I think it should be a double if the person is armed or high or both. And then you have other rules here. The one, I think that there are two that I'm very worried about, which is the word folks or folksy rhetoric. And this is where, Walter, I think we need your tuning fork to come into play.
Because I'll be able to tell you if these are genuine Minnesota-isms from him. I don't expect the white minstrelsy from Vance. He's a pretty polished and I think even-tempered guy. If Waltz throws something, though, that's going to, does something untoward, that should be 3 drinks, because I think it's possible. He apparently gave the finger to people at the Michigan football game. So if he launches a bird, you'll have to take the whole 6-pack down.
Yeah, that seems that might be a night ender. If that happens, let's see let's look at some of the pre-coverage. What do we got? We have MSNBC on there. We have CBS. What do we have? Any of those channels? Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
This transformation, trust me, you don't want to live in Trump's America. Signed by a named person who I won't name here from Springfield, Ohio. I feel like that even
I'm drinking to that.
Debate show,
oh my God.
I mean, yes, those lies were being spread as part of the campaign, but Trump said them to tens of millions of people in that debate. And then it creates the world in which real human beings have to live.
And I gotta say that the theory of the case for the Harris campaign and the theory of the case for everyone in the pro-democracy coalition is that, the country is just better than this. It just is that there's more people who don't want that than people who do. There's lots of people who are checked out. There's lots of people who don't understand the mechanics of politics or might not even understand the stakes or where J.D. Vance and Tim Walz's respective tickets might be on, say.
Chris is just such a pussy now. I can't stand it.
Michigan.
Notice I have my Chris glasses on.
Very nice.
To people, there is
I've got tons of props I'm going to whip out today.
Core question of decency and the degree to which we are bound to each
Very
other
nice. Smart
in some
glasses.
deep sense.
I'm tired of your secular gospel of decency,
they have
Chris.
pursued it, and Tim Walz is a very good messenger on that core
From
message.
the people who
Do we
told
want
me
good
Hitler's
things for
running,
our
I
fellow
don't want to hear
Americans,
about
or are we
decency.
trying to drive out people from this country
You think
and destroy them?
eventually
To J.D. Vance's question about
set
Trump,
will
was
just
he
move the two
Nixon
dudes
or
off
was he
the edge?
America's Hitler. I
Wait.
can assure him that Richard Nixon would never have done what J.D. Vance did.
Oh, now they're telling us what Nixon would have
All
done.
the crimes Richard Nixon actually did commit as president, and all of the horrible things he did in his political career leading up to his presidency. He never came close to doing anything like what J.D. Vance did to Springfield.
And I wonder what Tim Walz would do with that tonight. I mean, it's whether or not the moderators bring it up. I feel like it's on Tim Walz.
Well,
to try
so
to
we've
hold
got
him
the
to account for that,
predictive
especially, as
programming
you pointed
going.
out
There's going to
earlier,
be a lot of
especially
Springfield.
after
They're eating the cats.
Vance
They're eating the
admitted that it
dogs.
wasn't true.
Yeah, and I think we have to also remember that this is all taking place in a reality that people are already voting. Some of us have already gotten our ballots in the mail. So these guys have an opportunity.
You got more than one ballot?
That too.
Joey got more than one ballot.
Tomorrow.
Call the
They're not
FEC.
doing this in the context of what you're going to do on November 5th. They're doing it in the context of what you can do right now about what you feel. And at its best, politics is not about you when you run for office. And the most brilliant thing that Vice President Harris did in her debate with Trump is that she didn't even lean into her own identity in responding to him.
Because she doesn't have
She
one.
ignored it and let it bounce off of her. She kept bringing it back to the people watching. She said, this is about you. He can say whatever he wants about me, but it isn't about me. It's about you and what I want to do for you. That's really the sweet spot that I think Tim Walz can lead into tonight, because he's really good at that.
They're
He even
fluffing
spoke
as
to
hard
the
as they
nastiness and
can.
ugliness and cruelty of Trump. And he said, we're not
It's
supposed
just
to
not
live in
even
fear of them
disguised
because they're not
anymore,
Get out the
dangerous, they're
baby
just
oil.
weird. And he demystified them.
Yeah.
He is actually really good at that. He's good at taking the politics of hate and division and turning it back to, but wait a minute, myself as a governor, I don't care what people called me. I thought girls should be able to get, if they needed, their supplies for the month in their time of the month in the bathroom. I'm going to do that.
I even thought boys should be able to get
about
them.
Me, I'm about my constituents. Whereas this guy on the other side was willing to subject his own constituents to possible death for him, for himself. He did that not for America.
Subject who to death?
He did that for himself and for Donald Trump to get power. That's the only reason that
Actual
JD Vance
death.
has done what he's done to Haitian immigrants and to his own people in Springfield, Ohio.
I'm
Because
sorry.
he could give a damn about those people.
Okay, I'm not
what
gonna
he
say
cares
anything,
about is that one guy.
I don't think
pleasing
I could
Trump
say that on
to
the air and get away
power
with it.
for Trump
Could you say?
and for JD
Would you be
Vance.
comfortable saying that?
Sorry, go ahead.
That somebody wants to kill
I think
people?
the smartest thing said about it is from
subjecting
Eleanor
someone to
Clift, who
death?
is,
Wait a sec, I got to
I'll
put
just
on my
say she's older than Joe
MSNBC
Biden,
glasses.
And I say that only to invoke her wisdom and her years. She's seen more of this than all of us combined. And Eleanor said today, she said that because this campaign is so very close, it's going to be decided by a microscopic difference in voting in
How
this
do you
electoral
know?
college pattern. Something could happen in this debate tonight that decides this presidential election because it is so close. So that's why you're watching.
Let's bring back in Alex Wagner, who's joined in the spin room at the
not
site
why
of the
I'm
debate
watching.
by our colleague, former Senator Claire McCaskill. Claire, it's great to see you. Hey, Alex.
Hi.
Hi.
Claire, can I ask you, the scant reporting
They
we
should
have
just
about
have the
Harris-Walz
Democratic
campaign
politicians
strategy,
sitting
it
in
comes
the
from
lap
Pete Buttigieg,
of
who
the
played
reporter
JD Vance
of
in
the
Walz's debate prep, and
MSNBC
he
figure.
suggested that Walz is going to
Like
go
Santa
after
Claus.
Vance's
Actually, it should be the
faux
other way
populism.
around.
What does that mean to you, and how is that deployed most effectively?
Okay, good question from one of the
Yale.
listeners here. Hang on a second.
Hedge fund got to the U.S. Senate on the back of a billionaire that gave him $30 million.
Look,
just
it's a
wrote the
public
check
service.
to elect him. Listen,
Let's turn this
debate,
off for a
I
second.
think, Alex,
We
is
got a
gonna
few
be at
minutes
the end
before
of-
we go
Okay,
to.
I have some things to say. One thing. Number one, this is actually J.D. Vance's debut to the other side, before the other side. There was no reason for anybody on the Democratic side to watch the Republican convention. And he has been subjected, as we just saw, to a demonization campaign almost as intense as the one Trump has suffered, and in a shorter time. So Vance really comes out before the American people for the first time in his own right, okay? And I think that's very scary to the Democrats, because being able to see this guy that they have pre-spattered with shit, wipe it off his face and do anything besides being evil is going to be a win for him. In other words, expectations for his inhumanity, his desire to kill, and so on.
Subjecting constituents to death.
Yeah.
I guess sort of by the transitive property of something. I guess you could.
But remember, it's all about decency, right?
Well, wait. Who's my brain's fried.
Chris Finnish is talking about norms and decency, and we're better
right.
than that. And then they hand it over to somebody who says that J.D. Vance is subjecting people to death.
Right. Death.
Well, the decency program doesn't last very long with these people. But in any case, so I have thought that this was going to be one of the most important vice presidential debates ever for this other reason. Trumpism is thought and is construed as a one-person cultish program, not something that could lead to the creation of a sort of new coalition. But Vance is the youngest person in this campaign and represents a successor. And the idea that there could be something about Trumpism that is not just personal might be the result of tonight. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it could be. I think most of America hasn't. They've only read about him. They've seen him contextualized. So,
right.
But we'll see if he breaks out of the mold. We should probably go to the C-SPAN broadcast.
Let's do it.
Hold on a second.
not personal bankruptcy, but several businesses.
41 seconds away.
He's known for not paying contractors, middle America. You want to work for a man who won't pay you, a rich man who won't pay you. As far as the economy, he's racked up more than $3.5 billion.
All right, Stephanie, I will leave it there because we are now just moments away from tonight's simulcast of the CBS News vice presidential debate here on C-SPAN.
I'm going to close my door here so my kids
80
don't.
minutes of debate expected tonight between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. After the debate, we'll hear your phone calls and see your reaction on social media and take a look inside the spin room in New York to see how the campaigns are spinning the debate. That's all here on the C-SPAN networks following tonight's debate.
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become vice president of the United States. Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in
Mass.
20
I just
states.
spilled my BS.
CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala
Death.
Harris as the next president of the United States.
Death is going to be my theme tonight.
Yeah. Subjected to death.
News headquarters in New York.
You can't be subjected to death because you can't experience it.
I'm going to
Okay?
start a hashtag. Yep.
That's actually logically impossible.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil
Awkward.
debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News
Oh,
reserves
Lord.
the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is
They
set.
said that last
Governor,
time.
Senator,
Why do you keep
thank
saying
you
that?
for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time.
It's
Governor
been that way
Walz,
for
if you were
3
the final
years.
voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership.
Fundamental
is
should have been a
matter.
rule.
It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met.
Tim Walz is going to get destroyed tonight.
Secretaries of Defense and
he's nervous, scared.
He is nervous.
Nowhere near the White House.
He's fumbling
now, the
for words.
Closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding
what was the question again?
Matter. When our allies Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards
would you be in favor of
North Korea? When we
first
start to
strike
see
against
that type of fickleness around holding the coalition
has he even
together,
come close to
we
addressing
will
it?
stay committed.
No, he's not
And
even
as the
in the
Vice
radar
President
range
said
of it.
today is we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
How is it preemptive if they just got attacked?
Thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look,
There's an attempt to
allegations.
You'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it.
Bushism.
Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Isn't it? Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home.
He's doing very well.
When was the last time? I'm 40 years old. When was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce
the hurricane goes to climate change?
Yep, straight to climate change.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast.
That was shameful on the CBS part to cover up the actual event in
the government will put
generalization
the
about climate change.
When they suffer from a disaster.
Yeah, also,
and Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors. We work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together to solve the governors and the emergency responders on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But
his eyes look weird, like his pupils are just all the way to the edge.
Staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene.
This weird panic that I sense in him.
Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts,
I think that's a
500-year
drink.
floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the
county
solution
highway
for
hat?
us
Yeah.
is to continue.
Now that
to
we're
move
talking
forward,
about farmers.
that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters?
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse
your
by the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer.
What?
And thinking about how do we respond
This is all
to
like
that,
magical
we're thinking
thinking
ahead
shit.
on
I'm
this. And what
sorry.
Kamala Harris has been able
Dude,
to
if
do
you've
in
done all this,
Minnesota,
how come you
we're
didn't stop the
starting to
hurricane?
weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax.
Okay, people who are
and to
asking for the
take
drinking
oil
rules, go
company
to
executives
racket.com.
to Mar-a-Lago,
They're
say,
there,
give
they're
me
free.
money for my campaign.
Tim
Rocket
doesn't
Dot
have,
News.
and I'll let
Tim
you know
doesn't
that
have
we
an
want.
organized
We can be
mind. That's what
smarter
I've
about
learned
that,
so
and an
far.
all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing.
He's
creating
like
those
doing
jobs right
donuts
here.
on the ice like
Governor,
we
your
used
time
to
is
on
up.
Minnesota
the overwhelming
lakes in the
consensus
winter.
among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate.
Oh my God,
Thank you, Nora.
again.
We're going to turn now to immigration. The
Oh, that was
crisis
just
at
an
the
editorial.
US-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil?
That's a question?
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of
on my boxing card so far, I
had a mother who struggled with
first round
opioid
was
addiction and has
almost
gotten
a 10-8
clean.
for me.
I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Wow.
Well, she has said she's going to build the wall, right?
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including
why do
that
they
the
keep
Vice
calling them
President is, quote,
allegations?
letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis.
How do you know, dude?
How do you know that? How does anybody know that?
The last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths.
Anybody who's ever seen a TV show knows about crime, knows that kids are used to deal drugs because and move drugs because they can't be prosecuted as adults. Just watch The Wire, okay?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen.
I think being a senator,
JD's going to tear that
from
point
Oklahoma,
apart.
James Lankford, I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents.
Look at JD's face.
Detection for drugs. DOJ
so
money to speed up
eager
the adjudications on this, just what America wants.
To get the ball,
again. And actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no.
Kind of like, you know how George Foreman never sat?
It gives him a campaign issue.
In between rounds.
What would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2%
of Congress stopped him, Tim.
And Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children?
Oh my God.
Even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo $94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we
Wow,
fix this
that's an actual
issue
question.
with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort
His eyes
kindergartners
scare
to
me.
school.
Do they scare you?
I believe Senator
there's
Vance
something
wants
going
to
on
solve
there.
this, but by standing with Donald Trump,
I've never
and
taken
not
that
working
drug, whatever
together
it
to find a
is.
solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Vilify.
Tim,
Governor, Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just
Nah, that's
ask
not
you
accurate.
But let me just preload this
the
with
governor has made
negative
the point, and I think
propaganda.
As a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything.
Do we have cats?
On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators.
I think we heard a cat
and making
on
that
housing. Let's
affordable.
talk about
But it
Wall Street
becomes a blame.
speculators.
Look, this bill.
One of the
also
reasons they're
gives the
speculating on
money
Wall
necessary
Street
to adjudicate
is
I
that
agree.
you've driven
It should
up
not take
prices so
7
much
years
that
for an
you've made it a
asylum claim to be done.
profitable
This bill gets done
business
in
that
90
it wasn't
days.
before.
Then you start to make a difference in this, and you
Right.
start to adhere to what we know, American principles. Look, I don't talk about my faith a lot. But
Oh.
Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large
God, shut
number
the
of
fuck up.
Haitian migrants
It's so
who have legal
irritating.
status, temporary protected
Well,
status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's
Oh,
important because
you're the one who took his time.
The rules were that
The
you guys
economy-
weren't going to fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That
Thank
is
you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal
And
process.
Kamala-
We
and
have
Oh,
so
God.
much to get
What
to.
the
Whoa!
We
Those
have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
we
CBP
want to have
app has not been on the books.
Even Brennan's embarrassed. Look at her.
Something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret.
Meaning, no thank you.
Concern for voters. Each of your
Nora.
campaigns has released an economic plan. So let's talk about the specifics.
Wow, that was a
Governor
major
Wells, Vice
black eye
President
for
Harris
the
unveiled a
press.
plan that includes billions in tax
it's going to get
credits for
worse.
manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand.
Drink.
So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you
I'm
this.
gonna tweet that out.
He took
Jennifer.
folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Folks.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an
But first I have to say some other stuff.
Plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And
Fuck
the fact
all
that she
these
isn't
people.
tells
Fuck
you
the
a lot
Wharton
about
School.
how much you
The
can
Wharton
trust
School, fuck
her actual
CBS.
plans.
I hate
Now,
all
Donald
of them.
Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A
Did they do
lot of
this
those
when we
same
were,
economists attack
like in
Donald
the
Trump's
80s and
plans,
shit?
and they have PhDs,
What?
but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security
Exactly.
all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling.
Right?
I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things, we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this.
You're going to blame the pandemic on him?
Economists,
they've been doing that the whole time.
Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? Last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is
we do
Donald
produce
Trump
a lot of
was the guy
soybeans and corn.
who created the
I can
largest
assure
trade
you, I live
deficit
in the middle of
American
the
history
country.
with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that.
Watch what?
We had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit.
It's better to go to China?
Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement to bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making
he dies.
decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989.
The first time I've seen.
Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400. Town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17.
My town of 400 in the Minnesota didn't have streetlights. Towns of 400 don't have them.
A young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am.
Vance is
they saw where I was at.
Kicking his ass.
I will be the first to
tell you.
Are you
seeing the same thing?
I'll tell you in a minute. My community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect.
He didn't answer the question at all.
But it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress.
So he has no answer.
And in Congress, I was one of the most
about his whereabouts,
people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment
so they elected
has
me
been
even though I
to make sure that I'm there
that
for
wasn't
the people,
true. So
to
that's
make
my
sure
answer.
that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good
at. So the closest he came to an answer was that he gets caught up in rhetoric. That was code for I was just bullshitting.
Right.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
Oh. Okay.
So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Yeah, that was just bad. He just fell apart.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate
down goes Frazier
unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually
great with the comments. I mean, we're really getting good feedback.
Your comments are great, people.
You know, Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible,
registry of pregnancies,
to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works.
Dude, you just said that you were given the opportunity to pass a law that was particularly generous on reproductive rights, which you did. Why not be proud of it?
Healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
Not that there's anything wrong with doctors, but
certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican
good
Party
answer.
to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family.
Well, the women asked Mima Flowers, so they have to talk about it.
More options.
Yeah.
Now, of course,
No, but I
Donald
think
Trump has been
you
very
have to understand
clear
how
that on
people
the
are going to
abortion
respond to that.
policy
So.
specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense.
Like the Cowardly Lion.
A very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided
Bert
country.
Lahr.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restricted
the first
state.
time it worked.
Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth.
In a car accident?
The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that.
That was
you
interesting.
mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora,
isn't that in there?
things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust.
Man, we didn't
so
have.
many young women
We're supposed to be drinking as they fact checked.
So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive.
Why are there so many Don Rickles comments?
And maybe you're
he
free
looks
to
like
disagree
Rickles.
with me on this and
Oh,
explain
looks
this
like
to me.
Rickles.
But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong
This
about,
was-
Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong
That is
about?
not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been
Ouch.
misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best. when
Okay,
Roe
that's
versus
a
Wade was in
folksy
place. When
Midwesternism.
we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That
He
doesn't
could have said mind your own
preclude us
beeswax
from
and gotten it even
increasing
more on
funding
target.
for
But
children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So
I find him
hiding behind, we're going to do all
find
these
him
other things,
unlikable.
when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a
Didn't
lot
you?
to discuss. We have to move on.
Please
We're going to be right back.
help
with
me.
more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
All right, let me turn the volume down on this for a second.
okay, you asked. Okay, first of all, from my correspondents who were texting me, if you see me looking down and so on, there seems to be a belief that Vance's answer on abortion, which is never easy for Republicans, was pretty damn good. So we'll see if that proves true in the analysis. Who's winning? Vance is, it's about a 75 to 25 advantage to Vance. That's how I'd score it.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the things that the way we normally look at these things, who's smoother, who has more answers ready, who gets caught without any kind of response in a difficult situation. Walz has had bad moments, but more than that, I think it's been significant that Vance has been kind of pushing back against the effects of global capitalism, and Walz has started off on the defensive and then tried to argue that somehow they're on the right side of it. For the first time, I haven't really seen any politician do this since NAFTA and really win in a debate like this. Walz seems very uncomfortable with that topic, and he doesn't seem to know what to do with it, because I think it's clearly a loser with. And this whole thing about appealing to experts is just.
That was a big mistake, especially this year. Okay, Walz is scared. He's nervous. He has a disorganized mind. He goes back to his happy places in terms of rhetoric over and over. He failed to answer an absolutely straight question about his whereabouts in a nervous way. He didn't answer it the first time. The moderators held his feet to the fire, and then he basically, admitted that he lied.
Right, yeah, I misspoke.
But they used that as a setup to go to Vance and say, did you say things about Donald Trump that were negative or critical in your text messages and so on? And Vance basically said yes, but he wasn't being asked a matter of fact, like, where were you on a certain day? And so when he says he misspoke or he, has adjusted his beliefs, that's political. But the other question asked to Waltz was the kind that is asked in a trial, like, where were you on a certain day? And you can't answer in a trial the way he did without your testimony ever after being not credible.
Right.
So I think the big charge against Waltz is that he'll say anything and that he's kind of a liar, and he looks like one, and he's acting like one, and so the thought of which of these people I'd be comfortable having as president, if that is the uppermost question in the mind of people watching a vice presidential debate, is really not close, to be honest.
Yeah, he looks like somebody who really has issues. Hang on. I can't imagine him commanding a room in a National Security Council meeting or something like that. It's just impossible to.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Waltz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our
Fast
country
and Furious
is higher
type
today
stuff
than it was 3.5 years ago.
That was the other way.
But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids?
Right,
And I
yeah.
think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
That's sort of his
Well, I think
crutch,
all
is
the
common
parents
sense
watching tonight,
solutions.
This is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it. And I here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills? They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay. First of all,
what did I miss?
Way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it.
I do.
Driver of the gun violence epidemic,
I think it's the reason. I grew up in Minnesota. Everybody had guns coming out of their closets.
Problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools, we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was NRA.
Become friends with school shooters? Which ones?
I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today.
What?
And several
well,
things I want to
it's
mention
true that Tim has done a lot of posing with firearms in this campaign.
Where the most
and we do know that his running mate has vowed to shoot anybody who comes to her house and supposedly owns a gun.
Even though she's not registered.
We have and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat.
Stigmatizing mental health.
It's just the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it.
But Tim, it isn't just the guns. You just said when you were a kid you had a shotgun in your
I
car.
think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen,
I don't know what he's saying.
Thank you.
What he said
Let's
made
turn
no
now to
sense
the
at all.
top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing. and rent.
Stigmatizing mental health?
There's a
Does he think
shortage
that
of more
people
than
who do
4
this
million
shooting
homes
are
in the
all
United
healthy?
States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time
Walter, I'm going to take
homebuyers
a brief
and a
audio and
$10,000
visual break.
tax
You go
credit.
ahead.
They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from
You're also losing population there, Tim.
End up with stable
I mean, you are.
With stable housing
in Minnesota,
able to be able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor,
do we have another folks?
Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes
federal
up
lands.
Prices. Where are you going to build?
The federal government
the
doesn't have to
promising,
seize
and
its
what
own
part of
land. What's
any
she
of this
talking
plan will
about?
provide immediate relief. You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs.
Pass the bill. It's that
25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream.
I don't understand that she's going to build 3 million homes. The federal government is going to build these homes, or are they going to somehow incentivize home building companies to do it?
One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is think about it.
That's never been fleshed out.
More for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other too.
This is true.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Can I have it?
where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And
The
again,
allegation, it's just a point.
Fact check, I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question.
That's
are we
just
going to
not
drill
true.
And build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land.
They're down
Now,
this
Minnesota
year,
doesn't
I
have
think.
a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there.
Somebody
for a
was
reason.
saying
They
that he has a
belong to all
Tim
of us.
Conway
And
vibe.
again,
I
this
think
is
that's
when
true.
You view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of
I
these
just
houses.
drank
We're able to
without
make
a
some
reason.
investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, you Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Oh,
your
dude.
time is up, but Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify, there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's
Supply
a
and
Federal Reserve
demand.
study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly
Yes.
as Kamala Harris
Invade
says they
Canada.
have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
And Airbnb too, locking up housing for frickin' short-term rentals. It's going on all over
I get this as
Montana,
a governor,
and it's a
I don't
crime.
necessarily disagree with that. That in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are.
Is that what's
state. I don't know
happening?
Which ones? Are
Oh,
federal,
yeah,
but I
it's
think
happening
whenever we put
everywhere.
Regulations. People think they can
They're
get rid
taking
of them. I
an
think you
incredible
want to be able to get out
percentage
your
of
house in a
housing
fire.
stock
I think you
out
wanna
of
make
the
sure that it's fireproof and
residential
those type of
market and
things. So
putting
which
it
are the
into the
regulations?
short-term
Because
rentals,
the vice
especially
president's
in
not
sort of
responsible for those.
desirable or
Congress writes
tourist-oriented places.
Governor, thank
It's
you,
happening in my
gentlemen.
town.
We have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. I think it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%.
I don't see why he's afraid to say the Affordable Care Act is a huge bust and it's been a failure, because it has
actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice.
It feels
and will also
like
drive
it's
down
worse
costs.
than before. I don't know.
It's far worse, I can tell you.
Reinsurance regulations is what I was
It's
talking
an
about.
issue
What
I
Donald
cover.
Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United
So
States.
implicit in that question is the idea that government's
it
responsible for
salvaged
dealing with
Obamacare,
this.
which was doing
And-
disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans
Bipartisan
had
should have
access
been
to affordable
a
care.
rule.
It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's
Did
where
he?
being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those.
Oh boy,
We
Walter.
understand healthcare.
My dad
That's
worked
why
for
we're
both
ranked
those
Yeah.
companies,
on
3M
affordability
and Medtronic.
accessibility, and
I
quality of
know.
healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, More people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA.
People
but
hate
lost at
the
Supreme
ACA.
Court.
That's the
And
truth,
he
Matt.
would have
And they don't
repealed
use
the
it.
ACA had it not been
I
for the
had to
courage of
get
John
private
McCain to
insurance,
save that bill.
ACA
Now, fast forward, what that
compatible
means to you is
insurance
you
a
lose
few
your
years
pre-existing
ago.
conditions.
And
If
I
you're
went
sitting
into
at
the
home and you got
local
asthma, too bad. If you're a
insurance
woman,
agent,
probably not.
and
But
I
if you're
asked for an
during football,
application.
might
And they
kick
couldn't
you out.
find one.
Your kids
And I
get
said,
kicked out
why
when they're
couldn't you
26.
find? Why can't you
Kamala
find
Harris
one? He said,
negotiated
because
drug prices
you're
for
the
first
first
time
person who's
with
come in
Medicare.
here
We
in
have
2
10
months
drugs that will come on
to
most
apply
common
for
ones
it.
that'll be there. But look,
It has
this
huge
issue, and
deductibles.
when Donald Trump said,
It locks you
"I've got a
into
concept of
a
plan,"
very
it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never
specific
given me that.
tranche of care.
What Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going
The
to
only
do is
thing
for the
that-
insurance
that
companies,
they,
pick who
I
they
feel like
insure, because
the
guess what happens?
ACA
You pay your premium, it's not much. They're figure they're not going to have
Pre-existing
it becomes
condition.
synonymous
Those of
with
you a little
pre-existing
over, Gray,
conditions. That's the only thing they
look
ever
at
talk about
cancer.
with it.
Well,
You're gonna
that
get
is
kicked out
good,
of it.
and
That's
it
why
was
the system
it
didn't
applied
work.
in my
Kamala
family,
Harris
and it
will
was
protect
helpful.
and enhance
But there
the
were
ACA.
already state programs
Governor, thank
for
you.
people
Senator,
with
you have not yet
pre-existing
explained how you would
conditions
protect
in
people
Montana,
with pre-existing
and there were in many
conditions or laid out
states.
that plan.
The rest
Well,
of it has
we currently
been
have laws and regulations
disastrous.
in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what
So
Governor
apparently
Walz just
Trump
said is actually not
somewhere,
true.
according
A
to
lot
the
of what
Washington
happened and
Post,
the
is
reason that
somewhere
Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is
giving
that a
Waltz
lot of
shit
young and
for the
healthy
I've
people
become
were
friends
leaving
with
the
school
exchanges.
shooters
Donald Trump
thing.
actually helped address that
Well, what's
problem,
strange is
and
that he
did
never,
so in a
I don't
way
know that
that
he's ever
preserved
mentioned
people's
this
access to
son of
coverage
his
who had
being a
pre-existing
witness to a
conditions.
shooting.
But again,
That's why I think
something that these guys do
And
is they
I
make a
think
lot
that
of
when
claims
Vance
about
turned to him
That's
and
what I
said, "I'm
meant.
so sorry to have
Yeah.
heard that," he was putting a marker on it.
Exactly. That's
so
what I
that we
thought.
find, so that when we find out later, it's a lot like him being in Hong Kong during Tiananmen. People remember it. That's my guess.
That's what I thought too.
And would have collapsed.
Actually, I'm going to look and see what's going on with that.
leadership. He did his job, which is
Right now,
govern in a
Waltz's wife is
bipartisan
sitting
way
with
and
that
get
child going,
results,
"Remember?
not just complain about problems."
Remember when you saw the shooting?"
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then
So
what
you
happens
think the
is
individual mandate's a good idea?
you shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the
There
only way
was a
insurance
shooting
works.
outside the
When it
rec
doesn't,
center
it
at that high
collapses.
school.
You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck
So I see
buying
people
healthcare
tweeting,
once
"What's
you
the
get past
over/under
70."
of Tim
So
Walz
look,
having
the
lied about his
ACA
son
works.
witnessing
We
a
can
mass
continue to
shooting?"
do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of
Go ahead,
time. We have a
Nora.
number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota.
Every
it's one of
single
the largest Fortune
issue
500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California.
I feel like now is just
Those companies
about the
provide
government
paid
requiring
family
somebody
Yeah,
to fix
Medicare.
it.
Thing is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good
So
thing.
there is
But it also keeps
vanishing little
employees healthy.
reference to
We in
the way the
Minnesota
economy
have to pay
actually
family
works
medical leave.
in
You have a
this
child,
debate.
you
Vance has tried to talk a little bit about market forces.
What we know is that gets the child off to a
Waltz
better start.
made a comment about,
stay in their employers
you
and
know,
get more consistency in
conglomerates
that.
buying
So
up
Kamala
housing,
Harris
which
has
I
made it a
think
priority.
is a
We implemented
fair
it in
point
Minnesota,
that could
and
go
we see growth.
further.
That's how you become a pro-business state.
This is
Put
just like,
negotiations on it
how
and
much are you going to
compete.
give? How much are you going to give?
Offer it.
I know.
Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those.
Dude, once again, I mean, you had 4 years with Kamala to do all these things.
Do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are
Everything's
home
a
taking care
fucking
of their
mandate.
Well, he's a pro-natalist.
A number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue, and I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator, and I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money.
I'm tired of beautiful women.
These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like.
I'm less tired of them than I am of other kinds of women.
Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area, and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care, because look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families.
Those comments started
we could do a heck of a lot better.
A negative trend in the comment section.
You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve.
Here we go, cat ladies.
Will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in.
I can't even.
Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products.
All
back
women
to
are
our
beautiful,
country to
Walter.
undercut the wages of American workers.
I know you're supposed to say that.
Economic plan. cut taxes for American
We
workers
believe
and
it.
American families, cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building.
What about the
companies in
Manson
United States
girls?
of America, but penalize
Squeaky Fromm?
companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal.
No, I'm
And I
reading.
think what
Someone's
President
asking
Trump is
who's
saying
reading
is that when we bring in this
these
additional
comments. I
revenue
am.
with higher economic growth, we're going to be able
Are you
to
reading? Are you
provide
reading these, Walter?
paid family leave,
Okay.
child care options that are viable
Okay,
and workable
what?
for a lot of American families.
No, I'm just saying. As these
Can you
gazillions of
clarify
comments
how
are
that
scrolling,
will
are you able to see
solve
all
the
these?
child care
Well,
shortage?
I haven't been looking at them.
because, as
Somebody
Tim
says
said,
the
a lot of
Manson
the
girls
child
were
care
hot.
shortage is
That's
we
kind of
just don't have
true,
enough
actually. That's what
resources
they were
going into the
selected for.
multiple
That's
people
why
who
they were
can
able to
provide
get into
family care
houses and
options.
kill
And
people.
we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have
They
to
all had
induce more
the
people
clap,
who
though,
want to
didn't they?
provide child care
That was
options
in
for
the
American
book, the
families.
Bugliosi
We're in the
reason it's
wonk
so
section.
expensive right now is
I'm
because you've got
losing
way too few people
focus.
providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your
Do I care about women who aren't beautiful? I didn't say I didn't care
proposals.
about them.
Do you think Congress will
right.
agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised?
World War III is looming. Let's talk about
If
something
the
else.
Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And
It's
let's
like
be
there's
clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that plays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're
Well,
at
you
on this.
you
It's because
proposed
we got
6,000 and you're
down
telling
from
us
it.
it's
We
penny
thought we were
ante
gonna get
now?
by not paying people. I don't
Make it
think Senator
20.
Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress,
was that a-
I
was
can't
that a
believe
class
they're not-
dig?
When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota.
I feel
we
like
need
the
more workers
last
because our
20
economy's growing,
minutes
but we need the
have been
workforce.
about,
Governor,
is
thank you.
6,000
We
or
need to move on.
5,000
Let's talk about the
or
state of
how
democracy,
long
the
should
top
the
issue
leave
for
be? And
Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and
Yes,
other
Squeaky did try to
Republican
assassinate a
presidents,
president.
looked at the evidence
Ford.
and said there was
that
no
wasn't the
right
question. It
fit
was
for
whether
No,
she
no.
was
It's
pretty or not.
comments.
Every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress.
he didn't go to Wharton.
for January 6th.
Did he?
Senator Vance,
Wharton's
you have
at
said you would
UPenn.
not have certified
He
the
did.
last
He is a
presidential
UPenn
election.
alumni. I
would
don't
have
know.
asked the states
Wharton
to
is a sort
submit
of program or a
alternative
specialty
electors.
within
That has been
UPenn.
called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to
I think he
challenge
did,
this year's
actually.
election results, even if every governor certifies the
He
results?
would have.
I'll
His
give you
father
2
was a
minutes.
businessman. If
Well,
you
Nora,
go to
first of all,
UPenn,
I think that we're focused on
my
the
son
future. We need
did,
to figure out
and
how to
you
solve
want
the
a business
inflation crisis
focus.
caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020.
Thank you, Melissa. The beautiful women question is just dogging me here.
No. It's.
peacefully
I'm sorry, buddy.
in the public
It's
square, and that's
it's
all
the
I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember,
comments are coming
he
in so
said
fast
that
that
on
I can't
January the
even.
6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully.
Yes, Wharton has an
January
undergraduate
20th,
business
what
program,
happened?
exactly.
Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong
The word,
friendships
they
because
said
of
the magic word.
disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day.
What?
Some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota,
Some with the...
a group gathered
No,
on the state Capitol grounds
that
in
can't
St.
go
Paul
unchallenged.
and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police.
I feel
That
sorry for his
issue,
son.
And Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election.
Does that
you
count?
shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot
140.
box, shaking hands
Is that a
when
thing?
we lose, being honest about it.
We're
but
beaten.
What happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator
Let him
Vance, do you
talk.
want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time.
He actually inflated that number significantly.
Yeah, it's 100.
The election, I'm on
And
board.
pre-election, it was more like
Tim Walz is saying that
2,900.
This is just a problem that Republicans have had. I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to
The
stop
idea that
people
they
from
let
doing-
Donald Trump
threatening to kill
govern
someone,
and shook
threatening to do something,
hands
that's
rather
not
than
censorship.
impeaching him
Censorship is
twice
book banning.
and
We've seen
subjecting
that.
him to
We've
this
seen that brought
massive
up.
fake
I just think
investigation as a
everyone
Russian
tonight,
agent
and I'm gonna
is
thank
is
Senator Vance.
shocking to
I think
me.
this is the conversation they want to hear.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
I think what he's
Tim,
saying.
I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is
Has she tried
that is a damning non-answer.
Has she? It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds.
Has
That is
nobody-
a threat to democracy that will long outlive.
Has nobody briefed him
on
on the hate speech
I would
thing?
like Democrats and
No,
Republicans to
he
both
doesn't know.
reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's
Oh,
the
boy.
test.
Oh my
That's
God, you're
simple.
wrong, dude.
Tim, fire
Matt,
in a crowded theater.
your
guys
turn.
wanted to kick people off of Facebook for
This is
saying
part
that
of a-
toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the governor
masks.
does
That's
have the
not
floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't
He's
run
wrong
Facebook.
about that.
What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not. It's not anything anywhere other than in.
I can't
Donald
believe he
Trump's
doubled down
world.
on the
Because
hate
look,
speech thing.
when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you,
What's he
America.
talking about?
Will
I have
you
no idea. I don't
stand
even know
up?
what that means.
Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that. Because
Do
of
what?
course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that
Vance is,
democracy.
he does
and
that
who's
thing
gonna
every
honor
time
Donald Trump.
Walt
Governor,
says
your
something.
time is
Somebody
up.
has somebody
Thank you, gentlemen.
tweeted that it's
We
like
will
The
be
Office.
right
He
back
keeps
with
breaking
both
the
of our
fourth wall.
candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate.
So I think that the moderators got in trouble for their aggressive, one-sidedness and interruption.
And they toned it down, you
and
think?
their tendentious questioning. Yeah, they did tone it down for sure. They were getting so egregious. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know where it was going to go. Well, he didn't want to talk about censorship. He said only the most trite things that aren't accurate about yelling fire in a crowded theater.
And just quickly, so people know, if you want to look that up, that's Schenck v. United States. It's a case. There's no law about that. Oliver Wendell Holmes just brought it up in an old Supreme Court case as he was sort of postulating as an example, and that was from a case where they had an old standard for speech that has since been diluted. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I'm glad that Vance brought that question up. Obviously, we just got back from Washington and we both spoke on it. It's nice to see it reflected in the national debate. Trump didn't bring it up at the debate. I would like to see more discussion of that because I think of it as truly fundamental, and you and I talk about it every week, and there has been an incredible degradation of our First Amendment rights, such that you even told a crowd this weekend that we kind of lost the battle. And I think that's absolutely true for anybody who knows about the issue and the trend. I'm not sure that in this debate there's a lot of traction for the last half hour. Waltz is not good at this. He's just not good at it. He has now seems a little tired to me. He's really kind of grasping at straws. I don't actually know what he's talking about a bunch of.
He seems kind of scared shitless and just sort of he's throwing stuff out, with those eyes, like every time that he has to give an answer. But
But the thing I have noted throughout the debate is a kind of somewhat disingenuous over-civility between them. I appreciate that. I think we agree on many things. I think Tim is a good-hearted man, etc. Vance is a little bit doing the kinder, gentler thing that we saw Republicans do, 20 years ago. He's obviously not Trump. but he's very savvy and subtle in his derision, even though he can't be accused of being, overly sarcastic or combative.
Oh, wait a minute, we might have a problem here. C-SPAN seems to have
gone away.
Free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in
there
Washington.
it is. Sorry.
Live
Okay,
and on demand.
Okay.
Keep up with the day.
We've got so many comments, and I'm so glad. Stay with us, because the real interesting part, even though this has been a bit boring, is going to be the spin afterwards. Because I don't see how they rescue Waltz from this. They'll say he's not a great debater. No one ever claimed he was, and he had a few bad moments, but he held his own. That will be the line. If we have a post-debate drinking game, held his own is going to be said over and over. But I'm calling this a big win for Vance, if only because he overcame an almost hateful press up until this point. And I don't know that anyone will be after this able to buy that if they saw it.
Right. Yeah, no, here we go. Sorry. Oh, no.
In fact, I think you're going to see people saying, I wish Vance was running instead of Trump.
Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift.
Yikes.
And a whole bunch of folks in
no.
there.
The worst.
Did he really do
that? Bad clip, bad meme. Dick Cheney, Taylor Swift, and Bernie Sanders.
Better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is.
I might have to go throw up, actually.
That there can be an opportunity.
Did you ever think Bernie and Taylor Swift were going to be mentioned in the same sentence, let alone Dick Cheney?
The idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself.
Dude, you have made us so afraid of him.
She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class.
People think it's a fascist takeover.
At the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask
This is
for
like
your
that
vote
movie
on
with
November
Chris
5th
Rock,
for
like
Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz,
I'm
thank
Sharon
you.
Stone.
Senator
Okay.
Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Waltz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse.
That's the line of the
I
night.
believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
Okay, quick, MSNBC, CNN.
Yep.
Go to CNN. I think that's where I want to see it. MSNBC will do some meretricious thing that doesn't make any sense.
See, hang on a second.
CNN is trying to be reality-based in a small way lately, so.
The vice presidential candidates debate wraps up at CBS News headquarters.
He
in
held
New
his
York
own.
City.
Remember that phrase.
You see the candidates there being joined by their wives, Usha Vance and Gwen Walz. A cordial debate between these two men. I wouldn't describe them as evenly matched because they are so different.
Right.
You're right,
so
Walter.
different in style
You're
and
right.
so different on substance.
But he held his own.
Very interested to hear from the spin room, to hear from all of my colleagues here, to get to all of the analysis that we're going to get to.
Oh
I
my
think the
goodness.
big
They weren't
picture
evenly matched. I mean,
takeaway
to
from this
even
is that one of
expect.
these candidates is much slicker than the other. Is a
Oh
much
my
more
God.
practiced, kind of professional debate style speaker.
Right.
And the other candidate won. There was one bad moment for Tim Walz in this debate where he got mixed up and embarrassed in answering a question about exactly what month he had been in China in relation to the Tiananmen Square protest.
Right.
But then on guns, on January 6th,
Okay.
on Obamacare, on
She's just
the economy,
gaslighting us.
on
Flat
blaming everything
gaslighting.
on the border, back
This
again
is the
on healthcare, on
this is
abortion.
like the cleanup crew in
on
John
every
Wick.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
issue
saying?
on
So all she's
substance.
saying is that I agree with Tim
J.D. Vance was
Walz,
very
therefore he
polished
won
and
because
very
I prefer
slick,
his
and
policies. But
Tim Walz,
in terms of the debate,
beat him
he
on all the
lost
substantive
badly.
points. At least that was my take on it. I do think that there was one
How did we guess that?
very blunt, very easily disprovable lie on a very important issue that is going to be real trouble for J.D. Vance coming out of this,
What
which
is
was him
that?
saying, I never supported a national ban on abortion. J.D. Vance is bluntly on the record and on tape saying,
Wow.
I want abortion
She's working
to
as
be
hard as she
illegal
can. She's
nationwide.
earning
His
her $20 million
actual
here.
quote was, I certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally. Saying I never supported a national abortion ban when that's out there is something you're
Well,
never
the
gonna
one
shake
thing is a
in your
preference and the
campaign,
other thing is a
particularly when-
law.
When so
Yeah.
much of the country is mobilized on this issue of reproductive rights, the first presidential election after
Okay.
the
There
fall.
is a-
She's intervening.
Nicole,
Why am I always first?
because you lost short
Oh,
straw,
nobody
short
wants
straw.
to go.
So I
Nope.
think when J.D. Vance spent the night sort of building an intricate and beautiful fort out of toothpicks, and it was perfect. And at the end, he sneezed on it. The whole thing fell apart, and he had to walk out of that room over the broken toothpicks.
What are
I
you
think
talking about?
God bless the people who watched the whole thing and stayed locked in on it. I checked in with about 20 people all who do this and watch this for a living, and they were kind of in and out of some parts of it.
Yeah.
But no matter how you watch this, if
Yeah.
you cannot say what happened in 2020, and the only reason you're there is because what actually happened in 2020.
Talk about the
is that
debate.
Donald Trump sent his supporters to hang Mike Pence.
And by the way, they didn't
Just
mention
ask them.
one.
He sent his supporters to hang Mike Pence.
And I think that Governor Walz had a lot of great moments Tim Walz built that perfect.
I can't think of one.
I mean, J.D. Vance built this perfect artifice. He was speaking as though he were running to be Mitt Romney's vice. I mean, he spoke tonight. It was a performance that was kind of amazing and totally
unlike
disconnected
Kamala,
from the person
who was praised for her
he's
great
running with,
performance, as
Donald
though
Trump.
that
But
is in
still
itself
unable to say
it was
that Trump lost
accomplishment.
the election in
And in that
2020.
moment-
Unable to say it.
In the moment, I think everything that he did for 88 minutes was lost and wiped out by that one inability to tell the truth in front of a huge television audience.
Oh my God! Wow, they worked out this line.
I mean,
can you believe that they agreed on that tiny little talking point?
Mike Pence thing, right? So that was the moment of the night. J.D. Vance is very good at this, right? I mean, this is what he's been doing since he was.
But Tim Walz held his own.
Talking to libs and being kind of like, well, I sort of agree with you here, but here's the other part of this. And he did that all perfectly fine. I thought Walz on the substance, particularly on healthcare, was very, very strong on healthcare, on the sort of basic of like the tax cuts and who you're fighting for. Again, these are meat and potato core messages. The two moments that I think kind of broke me a little bit, I don't know about the median information level of the viewer, the level of gaslighting to say that Donald Trump saved the ACA.
Yes, he saved Obamacare.
Like,
really got up
All right, people are telling us to go to CNN.
Yeah, this is bullshit.
In a bipartisan way.
Let's go over.
All right, hang on a minute.
On how you listen to the Vance and Walz talk, that there are certain assumptions that they're making about those undecided voters.
Sure. Yeah.
One of them, that those undecided voters support abortion rights.
Mm-hmm.
Because J.D. Vance is fairly clear and on the record and has been for years that he supports banning abortion nationally. It was on his Senate issues page before he was picked.
Man, they're just
as Donald Trump's running.
So,
wait
a
J.D.
second.
Vance talk about that issue tonight. He expressed consternation with the Republican Party for not reaching out more, not talking to more people, wanting to provide more options for women. And yes, absolutely, did Tim Walz did not go after him on that.
That is what I'm, that's part of the point, is that you're actually explaining exactly what I think was missing on the debate stage. J.D. Vance has a record on abortion. And you didn't really hear about that from Tim Walz.
Okay, let's go to Fox. Let's go to Fox.
Hear it. And
okay.
secondly, J.D. Vance's job tonight was to launder Trumpism for middle America, for those undecided voters. And I think that in large part, he was able to do that without getting a whole lot of pushback from Tim Walz on the stage. And maybe they're talking to different segments of that undecided pool, but
I don't think so.
Vance was able to just do what he came to do, which is to take Trumpism and just package it up in a different way.
I said rehab. I don't necessarily think at the end of the day, though, that what we saw is going to make a big difference.
Oh God!
When you listen to J.D. Vance,
It'll make a
describe the Trump
huge
years,
difference.
low
I predict.
inflation, the world was not on fire, peaceful transfer of power. I mean, it sounds great. I don't know that that's necessarily exactly what the world experienced.
If you leave the public with that,
Talk about the
impression,
debate. They refuse to talk about the
No,
debate.
no.
They're rehashing their positions on certain issues.
And Walz, new generation, I thought he was very polished. And then Walz didn't do what Walz was supposed to do. He didn't help with men tonight. He really never explained what Kamala's policies are. Did you guys get that? I still don't know what she wants to do. And then he talked about Minnesota more than he talked about her. JD's best times were when he said, well, housing costs are up now. Groceries up now. Borders open now. She's in power now. Why doesn't she fix it? She can do it right now, and she hasn't. The best line is when he said, Trump doesn't have just a plan. He has a record. And you can look at the record. And then he said, we're going to restore the American dream. CBS was terrible. Second question on climate change.
Yes, I'm just drinking now.
You guys should have been doing this debate.
Yeah, it's not a game anymore. This is serious drinking.
I'm just listening to you talking, Jesse. I'm thinking about
that we saw J.D. Vance as the writer of Hillbilly Elegy tonight. He spoke about fentanyl.
Okay,
He
do we
spoke about
find
his
this more
mother's
interesting, or do we
inability
find
to pay her medical
the
bills
ass
and
covering on it?
No, yeah, I just wanted to go see if they are being
that
triumphant on
he
the
brought that
conservative
person back.
channel.
And I know you've spoken about this before, as that's how many people identified with him, and we saw that man again.
I want to go back
Yeah,
to
and I also
Cuck
think
TV
that
if
if
we
he
can.
and
Hang on a
Yes,
second.
serving the Congress,
MSNBC is
you'd
always
probably
the
see a
most
lot of, like,
entertaining. I mean,
Yeah.
state media and its, and its deconstruction is my fascination.
Alive. Yeah. JD Vance is incredibly smooth.
Oh,
He
my
said, number one, nothing
God.
memorable. There's
do
nothing
you live with
clippable in what he
yourselves?
said. They were just all smooth, bland lies.
He built a cathedral of toothpicks
by-
and then
maybe
sneezed.
awkward. He took him a while to get warmed up, but he won the debate because he actually had substance. He was relatable, and he
Oh, he
didn't
won.
go in there to
Yeah.
slay.
Oh, yeah, they said that
Vance.
already.
He went in there to show
All right, I'm
himself.
gonna go see what the,
and he showed himself
This is
to
for
be
people who didn't
bipartisan.
watch.
He showed himself to be
see
reasonable.
what the,
He showed himself to be practical. He acted as a
what the
governor.
DNC is
And
putting
a lot
out.
of
Hang
people
on.
are complaining that he didn't knock JD Vance out and that he
He
wasn't
held his ground, though.
cool. But that was not his job. It was obvious that his job was to sell Kamala Harris as president. He did that very well. He won the debate.
I wrote a note to myself that he was not on offense against Vance in
Yes.
the first half of the debate. And then he came back after that break, right? After the break, and was like, just destroyed him on healthcare. And then the January 6th, January 20th thing, I mean, I
on guns.
scratched out my own note. True, he was not on offense against Vance for the first half of the debate. And then he came back and more than made up for it. Yeah. Lawrence.
He will be remembered for that final exchange about, did Trump lose the election? And he doesn't answer. His technique is to not answer. It makes him, by the way, the very first vice presidential candidate in history who doesn't know who won the election.
Where did you see this?
Can we get the Eddie Murphy laugh?
Are the Republicans already in office?
It came at the end of a long list of questions that he simply didn't answer. He said words, but didn't answer. For example, the first one he didn't answer. Norah O'Donnell asked him, Donald Trump says climate change is a hoax. Do you agree? That's a one-word answer, yes or no. He didn't answer that. He just kept talking. He was then asked, Margaret Brennan asked him, will you separate parents from
John
children?
King's doing the
even if
magic
children
wall. Do
in
you want to see
US
that?
Yes, let's
All
go
right,
over.
hang on a
Did not answer.
Yeah, I don't want to see these pre-programmed and rather desperate attempts to.
Republicans were quite elated, thinking that J.D. Vance was prosecuting
Does
the
John
case
work
they
so
wanted to
hard at this
prosecute,
wall thing?
going after the
I
Biden-Harris record on the economy,
feel for
going
him
after
every
the
time.
Biden-Harris record on the border, repeatedly talking about inflation was lower, prices were lower, things were better in your life when Donald Trump was president, things are worse now. The same group, even the Republicans conceded, and Democrats were much more happier with that second hour, where they believe on health care, on gun rights, on abortion rights, on democracy, and January 6th, on issues that the Democrats believe play more in their favor. That Governor Walz got his footing.
Isn't
and
it
was a much better
amazing,
debater
Walter, that we
and
just
drawing much sharper
automatically
contrast? The question, Jake, is number
assume
one, does it matter at all? They're the
that
vice
there isn't
presidential
even, like,
candidate. In the past, it hasn't mattered
a
much.
fraction
Because this
of
campaign is
consideration
very
about whether
different.
things are
But
they're
at
saying
the
are true
beginning,
or not.
The two issues driving the
You know what
campaign
I mean?
right now are
With
Harris has a
these
big
channels.
deficit on the economy. Harris has a big deficit on immigration, and Republicans were happy tonight, and Democrats a little bit nervous that on those two issues, Vance carried it.
We will soon find out how voters themselves are responding to the debate. We have a focus group of undecided voters in Michigan, big important battleground state. We're going to check in with them. We're also going to get the first results of CNN's exclusive instant poll. This is a poll of people who watched the debate. Anderson, what's the view at the table in terms of the debate? What do your folks think?
It's so funny how they're all look,
right now,
they
but I
look
do
like
think it was
each other.
Fascinating how nervous it seemed that Governor Walz was when he first came out, and to the point was made earlier, perhaps I think with Nana's point, not doing a lot of television interviews, local, national, made a difference.
Yes, I think that is absolutely true. And I thought his first answer on the situation in the Middle East was probably one of his weakest answers. He closed strong, without a question. And on those questions of abortion, the Affordable Care Act, and of course the end on democracy.
I didn't know what he
very
was talking about with the Affordable
people
Care
are
Act,
shooting me
frankly.
numbers from dial groups across the way. And pretty surprisingly to me, they basically said it was more of a draw. One thing should be noted, and that is the degree to which we discussed before the debate, there are two J.D. Vances. There's the J.D. Vance that you saw tonight, and then there's the J.D. Vance who is a right-wing social media troll, the guy who really attracted the right to him. He definitely went through door A tonight, and he had a mission, and that mission was to be what Donald Trump isn't, which is to sound reasonable, to be courteous to the opponent, to acknowledge that there may be some reasonableness in the opponent's argument, but I have some other differences. I mean, it was really
which Governor Walz
pronounced.
almost played along with. I mean, rather than sort of pointing out, wow, this is a completely different guy, he sort of said, "Oh, we agree on
well,
that."
and I think
just
it comes
never give
naturally
up.
to Walz. I think someone texted me and said, "I wonder how many people in the country said, gee, I wish these could be the two candidates," because there
See,
were
I
people
told
who
you,
seemed to be
you don't remember me
having a
saying that.
reasonable, discussion. Bottom line on this, I don't think it changes
Walter,
the
I'm
race
sorry, I missed
at
that.
all.
Did you say
It was
that?
an interesting
Yes.
night. I don't think it changes the race at all.
I said
was
somebody's
struck
going to
by the
say,
fact that J.D.
I
Vance
think
is
Vance should be
significantly
the
more eloquent
candidate.
Donald Trump. Watching that, I don't agree with J.D. Vance on quite a bit, but he speaks to MAGA in a way that he comes off as an incredibly effective communicator. I honestly would be surprised that Donald Trump doesn't want to debate again because J.D. Vance did so well, and he's going to want the final.
Oh, sorry. Let's go back to. Let's see.
What? She thinks Trump's going to want to debate again because why?
Next to each other, it was very collegial, very avuncular, we agree on stuff. And there was some of that vibe. You saw a little bit of like, oh, this is the J.D. Vance that made lots of liberal friends at Yale. This is the Tim Walz that won a very Republican district.
So what they're trying to do is reconcile for the audience the difference between the monster that they've been painting J.D. Vance to be and what people saw tonight.
The thing that really sort of like cut it was to get back to that democracy question in the end, which it was interesting. Walz almost apologizes for it, where he says like, we're agreeing on a lot of stuff and there's a lot of bipartisan. This is a thing I can't go with you on, and I just thought it was very human. You could tell. You could.
They're
see
not forgiving
his
Vance for not living up to the cartoon that
he
they've
doesn't
painted
like
of him.
Fighting and arguing. He doesn't like delivering the blow. It's not who he is. He had to kind of steel himself. He almost apologized for it.
He kept saying, "I'm so shocked.
I'm so shocked. I'm kind of bummed out by this, dude."
Walz is too nice.
But it was, I found that part all the more effective because of what you were saying about that sort of like slow burn and sort of collegiality and pretty wonky on stuff like housing, which I thought was actually a good exchange and sort of interesting. That part, it was like we can all walk
somebody had a
together
good
and talk
comment
about
here.
these
Wait.
policy things up to a point, but there is a point at which we can't. And Tim Walz, am saying this is really the point.
Let me just actually break the wall here a second, ask the control room. Do we have SOT 19? We're getting the piece of sound that you're getting, that you're referring to. We're going to try to turn around quicker than everything else. It takes us a second after the end of the debate to get all this pieces of sound turns around. But I think that one we've pulled. I just want people to hear exactly what you're talking about here.
SOT 19,
About
huh?
the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others
I think
filed
immigration is
62
above
lawsuits
the state of
contesting the
democracy. I'm not
results.
sure.
Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal.
They're just going to hang
would
on
you
this
again
like
seek to challenge this year's election results?
they're going to sink their
even
teeth
if
into this
every
SOT.
governor
January
certifies
6th is their
the results?
nookie.
I'll give you 2
They
minutes.
put their nookie in and
Laura,
they
first
suck.
of all, I think that we're focused on the future.
What? Oh, what
I
happened?
just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy.
January
in a way
6th
that we
is a
had not
media-driven
seen. It
controversy,
manifested itself
which
because of
I
Donald
hear
Trump's
no
inability to
one
say.
talk
He is
about
still
from the
saying
left,
he
right,
didn't
or the
lose
middle.
election. I would just ask, did he
Except
lose
for
the
those who
2020
are
election?
absolutely
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did
saturated
Kamala Harris
with this
censor
stuff.
Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID
no.
situation?
That is
Has
a
she tried
damning.
to-
That is a damning non-answer.
You can't.
That is a damning non-answer. The verbal rejoinder there, half as powerful as the facial expression in that moment.
Well,
Lawrence?
Yeah, and that was a moment that was coming all night. And I don't know if Tim Walz deliberately held it to that and waited for it to get to that point, but it really was the moment that kind of
He was
reshuffled
rope-a-doping.
everything.
He didn't wait. They asked the question.
In the last 88 minutes or so changed in a way that was very, very, very clear that there's one person here who is actually capable of dealing with reality, and there's this other person who will say anything, whatever is necessary to say to get through, to thread the Trump needle to get where he has to be on whatever the question is. There was another great moment where he was asked a very simple, direct question: how do you protect pre-existing conditions in whatever the Trump healthcare plan?
All right, Walter, we might have to turn this off.
Okay, let's turn it off and talk about what we saw, because all we've seen is a bunch of.
I'm gonna puke if I have to watch it.
Well, you see, what MSNBC is trying to do is console its audience. Okay, they're trying to rerun the debate. They're trying to edit it and spin it and so on, such that people don't get depressed. They don't want them to get depressed. The truth is, I said early on that it was 75-25 in Vance's favor. I think by the end, it was 65-35 in Vance's favor. And here are my reasons for that. Number one, all the things that they accused him of being and spun as a negative, smooth, polished, building a cathedral of toothpicks and so on, actually are usually considered virtues in a debate. Being well-spoken, putting together appealing arguments and so on. The way they dealt with the fact that these qualities in Vance showed and came to the fore is by saying he's fake. Don't believe the smooth guy. He's actually this other person. He's a shapeshifter and he can do anything. Well, the fact is that most people pay a little attention to vice presidents, and this is the most attention they'll pay tonight. And in terms of meeting and exceeding expectations, Vance won the night. You can take away his coherence and call it smoothness. You can take away his sophistication and call it something bad. But now back over to Walz. Walz did get a little better. I agree. He did not look terrified as he did at the beginning, which was almost endearing in some ways. He's not, it's true, someone who's good at this. But I didn't find, as I say, the essential question of whether or not one of these people, by some accident could become president, to be answered in Walz's favor tonight.
Oh no, not even close.
In any disastrous situation in which one of these people was forced into a decision-making role, the clear choice, I think, for any practical person would be Vance. Now, for ideologues who expected him to, say outrageous things that would turn people off, it was disappointing because he was very adept and very subtle, and he was courteous, and he sort of deferred to Walz.
Well, he
but-
also deferred to Democratic voters. The whole thing about
and he deferred to Democratic voters. But when they accused him of trying to launder, or the one comment that stuck with me was the woman on MSNBC who said he tries to launder Trumpism, make it acceptable for a wider audience. Well, that's exactly what I would do if I was Trump's vice president. I'm trying to bring people who have been offended by him or are repelled by his persona or find his jagged edges troubling. I would want to win over those people. So that would be exactly my strategy in a vice presidential debate if I was running with him. I think they're angry that he may have succeeded in that.
Right. I mean,
I'm taking my hat off. I can't get it right. It looks weird. The bill.
No, it looks great. It looks great. Look, the only thing they've succeeded in 8 years in building up this satanic persona of Donald Trump, and the idea that we can't analyze him as a conventional politician, what he stands for, what he did. How the economy was, whether we were at war or not during his presidency, none of that stuff matters. He was Donald Trump. He's the ultimate evil. He hates democracy, all these things. Once you remove that from the equation and we start talking about, one set of policies and preferences versus another, it's, you could look at Trump and just say he was sort of a conventionally,
centrist Democrat.
Look, there were some things like the Muslim ban that I thought were really extreme, but other things were not, right? Like, and even the the bailout rescue plan, which is something I was sort of against. That was completely like a bipartisan deal during the beginning of the pandemic. But they do not want to open the door at all to the idea of let's examine these people as actual politicians. They have to be cartoons.
They resented the fact that that Vance normalized Trumpism to some extent.
Right. He was slick. He was putting an image.
Right. Don't believe it. Now, in Waltz's defense, he's a guy who I have been on record as finding grating and ridiculous, and I have an allergy to Tim Waltz's persona. I can't apologize for that. I do. But my allergy was not particularly aroused tonight. I didn't find Waltz, repulsive as I sometimes do. He was somewhat subdued, maybe because he was so damn
he
nervous.
was drowning the whole,
Yeah.
and he was. I mean, you have a hard time rooting for someone to not reach the surface when that's happening.
But if this were imagine that this had been a presidential, not a vice presidential debate, and the stakes were high, and America was essentially looking to see whether or not they felt secure with the notion that one person would be leading the military, etc. I think it would go to Vance's favor strongly.
Yeah, I agree. He came across as a prepared, reasonable.
He slightly overdid it on the hard knocks Ohio upbringing. He got perilously close to Kamala's fixation on a middle-class background, except his was a working-class background. He mentioned his mother several times. I expected Waltz to be schmaltzier, frankly. It's his schmaltz that gets me, and he reined it in somewhat.
Speaking of reining in, I think you're right. The producers must have talked to both of those moderators.
Oh, they were on a trajectory. They were on a trajectory for the worst debate ever in history, even compared to the last one in terms of moderator interference and
they made David Muir look like Edward R. Murrow in there.
Exactly, and somebody just yelled at them, and there was a strange okay, this is a dynamic that appears to me as a dramatist, not necessarily as a political analyst. It was boys versus girls, and that had a strange effect on the whole thing. I think one of the reasons that sometimes Vance and Walz seemed almost to have a kind of solidarity that you couldn't quite place was because they had two females coming after them, and I think that that the drama of being sort of pushed, across gender lines made them look like two guys who at times had more in common than they had different.
Right, but Walz came across as a guy who is afraid of women, whereas Vance came across as more guarded. I thought he seemed stronger, in that area. He wasn't disrespectful. It's just that Walz seemed like he didn't know how to answer any kind of a challenging question.
I mean, it was the kind of debate, actually, that, sophisticated people say they want. It did have a lot of substance to some degree. In terms of substance, though, it lacked whole areas of concern to people. There was no war and peace. There was just that weird tilted question at the beginning about whether you would support a preemptive strike against Iran, which made no sense since Iran has just struck first. So how is it preemptive? I didn't know what they were talking about.
I didn't even know what answer they wanted.
Did they mean retaliatory, or did they mean
retaliatory?
Who would answer that question? No. That Israel has no right to retaliate to a major ballistic missile attack. It was a weird question that was terribly framed.
But then they just completely kicked the foreign policy stuff off the stage for the rest of the debate, and the things that were about $6,000 copays or whatever it is, or tax breaks, while the world's like teetering from.
The worst moment for the moderators was when they wanted to talk about the hurricane. They wanted to talk about the disaster in the Southeast, but just when it seemed they were going to let them talk about it, they then covered it in the climate change mantle
twice
and made it a climate change question, which was ridiculous. Vance got the best of that one by addressing the actual disaster and sort of giving short shrift to the climate change packaging.
It's just maybe journalists don't have any ear for how audiences receive them anymore. I mean, remember in 1988 when Bernard King pulled that question, and look, it was a kill shot for Dukakis. The whole, like, if Kitty Dukakis was raped and murdered, would you favor the death penalty? You remember that whole thing? In the debate right? And, it was a gotcha question that Dukakis blew. But it was obnoxious, and people kind of, it sort of decreased the estimation of both Bernard King and Mike Dukakis afterwards. And people didn't love the way that was handled. But now there's just no even hiding the fact that they're just trying to throw their own ideological ideas over the whole camp. It's just like, here's how things are. Do you accept it or not?
Here are all the bad things that you or your running mate have done. Now defend them, okay?
Right.
One terrible trend in these debates is that the time is eaten up by the questions. There is no question that is less than like a paragraph, and includes a long preamble and an editorial, and then you're in suspense going, what question are they going to derive from the attack they just made? And there was also this matter of framing everything that JD said as an allegation. They
Allegation.
never used that word when Waltz spoke about Vance. They only used it when Vance spoke about him, and it was glaring. The other thing is, I don't believe. Okay, Vance is 20 years younger than Waltz, and I don't believe you saw the future in Tim Waltz. You saw a kind of prematurely broken down, hesitant, nervous, not particularly well briefed man who was relying over and over on a few rhetorical tricks and a kind of address to the audience of, listen, folks, you know, da 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 da. And he actually looked somewhat decrepit, I thought, frankly.
Yeah.
In other words, since the Democratic line this year is we're building a path or we're blazing a trail into the future and so on, he really couldn't affirm that message in any either rhetorical or sort of personal way. He looked like old news, and Vance looked like new news. Maybe new news that's repulsive to liberals, but he did seem to have the mandate of vigor about him.
Yeah, he talked about new issues. I mean, censorship is something that the Democrats have never talked about, but Waltz just got up there. He talked about trust the experts, right? Pre-existing conditions, and the rest of it was just folks. And you know, it's like the thing I was reaching for before was the movie Head of State, where the guy had his only line is, "I'm a war hero and I'm Sharon Stone's cousin." He just does that over and over again. That was all he had was, you know, his sort of globalization, NAFTA, neoliberal policies plus pre-existing conditions, which is like the one thing that they think they've given America in the last 40 years or whatever it is.
Well, so if you look at the rules of our drinking game, you get a sense of how little the debate resembled what one might have expected it to be. There was no talk of their military service. Okay, Vance spoke of his own, but Waltz didn't ever mention his, which was longer. There were no red meat attacks from Vance. Hey, you bailed on going to Iraq. Hey, you fudged your service rank when you call yourself, you know, whatever, master sergeant something. You know, Vance did not go there. He made a decision that going after Waltz as a liar and in a personal way was not going to work, and he didn't do it. And I think I know why that is, though. Why?
Because he's going to let the internet and friendly media do it for him.
But for example, we expected some talk about Waltz's China ties, his many visits, his 30 visits or whatever to China. They allowed Waltz to put that in the most positive light. He took dancers and basketball teams there, but Vance never pressed that. In other words,
no, he just let him drown during that one question, though.
But the old trope about vice presidents is that they're the attack dogs of the president. But you can't beat Donald Trump's attack dog. You'll never beat Donald Trump at attacking and being dog-like, you know?
Right.
So this was a reversal of the usual roles. And Vance decided, I'm going to be the statesman-like, reasonable Ivy League policy literate gentleman.
I was actually surprised that Waltz didn't go after his Ivy League-ness, which was smart, finally, right?
And I think there was a decision made that my dad always used to say, don't get in a pissing match with a skunk, that if Vance went personal, Waltz might, I don't know, become vicious toward him. And he didn't do it. I felt that there was a real calculated strategy of sort of letting the old man, giving the old man his dignity.
Oh, I didn't think it was that at all. I think it was, it's the old Texas Hold'em poker thing where when your stack is bigger, you just you just let the other player slowly die. Because what Waltz from the very beginning looked like he was self-destructing,
and in real terms, I don't think that many people probably stayed through the whole thing. I mean, I would imagine there was a real fall off in viewership, and that makes the first part the most important. And the first part was by far the strongest for Vance. I'm reading our comments on the screen as it's going on, and it was Waltz's comportment that was the overwhelming concern or focus of our commenters for the first half hour. He looks terrified, et cetera. And I think people saw that, and that was a bad look, not just because it makes a debate go badly for someone, but because there's a question of Kamala's competence, frankly. There's a question of her depth. And he didn't assure us that she's backstopped by someone who knows his shit.
No, he's, if anything, more of a cipher than she is, almost. But, the last thing I'll say, I want to give a shout out to Larry here, because I do think.
Who's Larry?
This Larry Jacquez commenter here.
Oh, okay.
That the rebutting the J6 stuff with the censorship line is the first cogent response that the Trump people have had to that whole thing. I mean, as I know from talking to Trump people, between themselves, they say stuff like, look, it ain't good, right? Like they don't love it. They think it's overblown. They think there are elements of the story that they're upset about, but it's not great. They see it as politically, a weakness for them.
The election stuff?
The J6 stuff.
So in my experience, the J6 stuff is an obsession of partisan Democrats. To them, it's the be all and end all. But in terms of actual voters, I think it's one of the low priorities. I don't think they're analyzing this thing based on who is going to accept the results of the election. Let's vote for Kamala because the other guy won't accept it. This is an election which I think the Democrats are fumbling. And to be honest, I think they're going to lose. And I said so today on Twitter. I said their denial about the conditions and realities on the ground, especially in the battleground states, socially and economically, are their greatest weakness this time around. And on the issues that I think are cause people to go out and vote, the economy, whether you can buy a house or not, immigration, because immigration is not an abstract issue in America right now. The numbers are such that almost everybody who doesn't live in a gated community has personal experience with this change in circumstances. You go to the emergency room, if you're poor, you line up for social services, and the line is much longer than it used to be, and so on. And on the issues that I think are actually going to decide the election, I think Waltz was poor.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that was actually really interesting. Thanks everybody for coming out and hanging out with us. And I think to the extent that vice presidential debates matter in these races, and to the extent that voting even matters in this election, because I'm not so sure about that even. The this certainly is going to have an impact. It's just a question of whether it can have a positive impact for the Democrats. I think that's the only. And whereas the last time, I think it was pretty clear that there was no way to sell that as a Trump win. I don't think really easily anyway.
I actually did try to sell it as at least not a Trump loss, and I think I was vindicated in that by these focus groups. I don't know if we have a moment to go back and look at this focus group stuff they're doing.
Oh, a sec. Yeah, no, I'm caught in login hell with all these people. And
this is a real world election. It's not one that's about ideology. It's not about burning the flag or all of the pseudo issues that we remember maybe from the 90s and so on. It is an election which I think will be decided over the conditions in people's lives. Am I in debt? Can my children buy a house? Is food too expensive? Are my wages keeping up with inflation? Do I feel threatened or in some way insecure about the appearance of recent immigrants in my community? On those issues, I think the Republicans have tried to be realists, and the Democrats have tried to use slogans. And one of the weird moments tonight was when Waltz said, "Don't stigmatize mental health in terms of school shootings. It's just guns." Well, unless...
but then he didn't just say that he had a gun in his seat while he was coaching football or whatever?
Yeah, for pheasant hunting. So not stigmatizing mental health, does that mean we don't want to call crazy people crazy? Or school? I think, in other words, there's no risk in stigmatizing a school shooter as crazy, I don't think,
since we're bragging about becoming friends with them or knowing them or whatever.
Right. But that was he meant school shooting victims.
I know.
They grabbed onto that. It's not a real gaffe. It's just an apparent gaffe. But I will say that there was one gaffe tonight that I think will be all over tomorrow. Taylor Swift, Dick Cheney, and Bernie Sanders as a trio of representative coalition members for Harris.
That was the kind of thing that I would expect to hear if I were tripping and watching a.
No, I mean I'm gonna see that trio alluded to nonstop tomorrow. I'm sure there are going to be memes of the three of them standing together. Who will be in the middle? Cheney with one arm around Swift and one arm around Bernie,
or it's gonna be like the South Park Human Centipede episode, the Human Centipede. You ever see that horror movie where they they surgically attach them to each other? Actually, the horrifying movie ever. But now I'm gonna think about it with those three, which is gonna be the worst thing of all time.
Right.
So, but anyway, yeah, I think that was
that trio basically reminded everyone who isn't well disposed toward Kamala why they might actually hate her. Or her movement, at least, because it's got one pop star, one war criminal, and one socialist who's sold his soul.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's our ticket. Yay. All right. Well, that was awesome, folks. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for the awesome comments. I think,
they were great tonight.
Yeah,
and just because Matt didn't put them up, see, he doesn't give me that ability. There were many. Maybe I have it too. I just don't know. It's like the Wizard of Oz. I've always had that power and I just haven't used it.
Yeah, I think you do have that power. We haven't activated that yet somehow, because I have trouble. I can't even, they're coming so fast that I can't actually get the cursor on it in time. But
One reason I love doing this and with you, especially the live streams, is because of the comments.
Oh, yeah.
The level of engagement, wit, just outrageous humor, and sometimes incisive commentary is more than we're able to bring into the show, especially because only Matt puts up the comments and I didn't know I could.
We'll democratize this by the next
and I
time.
find it just endlessly delightful. So thank you. It may seem like you're just, throwing pebbles into the ocean, but they do get in our heads, and we'll pretend a lot of those lines are our own later.
Exactly. Exactly. Awesome. All right. Thanks, folks. And we will see you again soon, I think, right? But certainly by the end of the week. And Walter, have a good night.
Okay, man. Good night.
All right.